Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, all praises and double honors due to Yahweh, Bahashem HaMashiach, wa Malak Yahweh Shai. Secondly, Brother Yardan, WFI Detroit coming back at you with yet another cold cut. And before I dive into this cold cut, I would like to give a warm salute and welcome to the men, women, and children that are laboring day in and day out, scattered throughout the four corners of this world, fasting, reading, studying, and bringing forth fruit meet for repentance. Aparatizah, that is to say, in the name of the Father's will, that you may get edified through the Spirit of the Lord. So with that being said, I'm going to dive into the video, which is Islamic captivity, the AHGAS. Now, what is the AHGAS? Now, before you is 2 pages from a book titled The Black Holocaust for Beginners by S.E. Anderson. Now, this book goes into great detail of what happened towards the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans during the 15th and 16th century. And it goes into depth on pretty much most nations and how they afflicted us. Now, of course, all of this goes back to the Bible, such as Deuteronomy 20th chapter, and it fits with the curses to the T. So I'm going to read it. The need to procure eunuchs outside Muslim lands sprang from the requirements of Islamic law. This very law, which forbade Muslims from reducing another Muslim to slavery, understandably barred them from making him into a eunuch. Islamic law, in addition, prohibited Muslims from performing the operation, and as a result, castrating young boys 8 to 12 years old became a task that fell to non-believers, to be done in their own country. The unending stream of desexed boys were walked or transported by boat or caravan from their native lands in Europe and later Africa, because African boys' survival rate was higher and there were more of them arrived ready, made in Muslim countries. And it also provides the source, which is Murray Gordon, and he wrote a document or perhaps a paper titled Slavery in the Arabic World. Now, there's a lot to unpack, but again, this is the illustration of what they call the AHGAS. And what they've done to us is made eunuchs out of us. Now, that's something found in the scripture as well. Bear with me while I pull up that verse. Now, there's a few. There's in Daniel and as well as Matthew are the 2 verses that I'm thinking of. Alrighty. This is book of Matthew chapter 19. Let's jump down. Verse 12. I'll highlight it. And it reads, "For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb." Now, what's a eunuch? Let's dive into it. A eunuch, a man who has been castrated, meaning his testicles have been removed or otherwise made non-functional. Historically, eunuchs were often employed in positions of trust and responsibility, particularly in royal courts and harems, where their lack of reproductive ability was seen as a way to ensure loyalty and prevent political intrigue. So another verse popped in my head, which was, I mentioned Daniel, Matthew. It just slipped my mind. Lord willing to come back. But with that said, let's dive back into the verses. Acts, the 8th chapter. So I get those verses shortly. But before I do, I want to read Matthew 19 and 12. "For there are some eunuchs which were born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it." Now, of course, all of this falls into context of verse 1 on down, and Yahushua expressing the purpose of marriage and how man and woman is always meant to be together. And he goes into the law. He quotes the law. But the reason why we're bringing this out is to tie into the topic of the video, the AHGAS, and how the Arabics, they castrated us. And men that are castrated, as the Lord stated. Some are eunuchs from their mother's womb, meaning some men are born in this earth without reproductive rights, or perhaps they have the genitals, but it may not function accordingly. And there are some eunuchs which may be made eunuchs of men. And as we just read the definition, we know why men were made eunuchs. And then you have eunuchs which are made eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake, meaning there's certain men. That doesn't mean men are castrating themselves, but that just simply means that men are abstaining from women so they can focus on the work of the Lord, pursuant to Romans the 7th chapter. I'm sorry, 1 Corinthians the 7th chapter, which I'll get quickly. Romans, 1 Corinthians, Salakia, chapter 7, verse 8. I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. And how was Paul the apostle abiding? He was abiding as a man not married. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. Meaning it's better to marry than to just continue to fall victim to your flesh. And whatever case that may be, we know when you burn, you're just inflamed with the urge to, procreate. I'll keep it PG-13. But I'm sure those who have an ear, you have an ear to understand what I'm saying. So with that said, I want to dive into Daniel, the first chapter as well. And it can also be somewhat implied, not adding to the word, but one can read between the lines and extrapolate that there was a eunuch in the book of Esther. It may mention it, but, I can't remember everything, so let's see. Esther chapter 2. Let's look it up. It may not be there, but that's okay. But nevertheless, in Esther, the 2nd chapter, we find that King Ahasuerus is looking for some virgins, young maidens. That's verse 3, where it reads, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the woman, unto the custody of Heg, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the woman, and let their things for purification be given them. And so more than likely this man may have been possibly a eunuch. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't say, but one that is in charge of a variety of women, they're typically made a eunuch, so obviously they don't freak off into the night. Now that was the case as well in the book of Daniel. The 1st chapter and the 9th verse, which reads, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So you have the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse, liking then the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. And so the prince of the eunuch had close ties to kings and perhaps people of royalty. So with that, let's dive back into that book. The need to procure eunuchs outside Muslim lands spring from the requirements of Islamic law. But what Islamic law is allowing one to castrate young boys? Let's find out. So here we have it. Procuring eunuchs, and this is a general AI overview, simply meaning that it's gathering a plethora of websites and providing us the crux of the website, just the main focal points, and summarizing it. And so prohibition of castration in Islamic law. Islamic law prohibits changing God's creation, and this is interpreted as making castration forbidden. Some sources suggest that the act of castration was also condemned in the hadith, sayings, and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, so-called prophet. Well, not so-called, not prophet, Salakia. Loopholes in procurement practices. Despite the prohibition of castration, historical evidence shows eunuchs serving in various capacities within Islamic law, like Islamic societies, notably as guardians of harems, palace officials, and even military commanders, and so on and so forth. Eunuchs and legal status. Muslim jurists acknowledging the presence of eunuchs address their status within Islamic law in various contexts, including marriage, divorce, and paternity. Eunuchs were often legally categorized as male adult slaves, though their castration was recognized as a distinguishing character. Interestingly, in discussions regarding marriage and divorce, the degree of castration, whether only testicles or the penis were removed, impacted their legal rights and status. So I'm sure there's a lot more history, but time will fail us to go into all of it. But nevertheless, I find this book to be a trustworthy source because it has not only cites, but it's been fact-checked as well. In addition to that, upon the other atrocities that Islam has, in the name of Islam, Muslims have done towards the so-called blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, it's not too far-fetched to believe. Diving back into the book, this very law, which forbade Muslims from reducing another Muslim to slavery, understandably barred them from making him into a eunuch. Islamic law, in addition, prohibited Muslims from performing the operation, and as a result, castrating young boys 8 to 12. Now, similar to the Amalekites, if you have an ear to hear, then you will understand that Amalekites is slang for the Ish people. And unfortunately, due to YouTube's restrictions and their strictness, they could possibly flag this video and or channel for the usage of that in any derogatory way. So we refer to them as small hats and or their so-called biblical identity, Amalek. They're really Esau at the end of the day. Islamic law, in addition, prohibited Muslims from performing the operation and, as a result, castrating young boys 8 to 12 years old, which of course is abominable, detestable, and everything that is unholy and ungodly. This is the book of Acts, chapter 8, verse 26. Now you have to ask yourself, if you find yourself inquiring or having itching ears to hear more about the doctrine of Islam, then you have to really dive into the history of Islam and find out if it's actually appropriate for you. Because this is what they've done towards your ancestors. If you find yourself to be a so-called black, Hispanic, or Native American man in America, and or anywhere else scattered throughout this world, this is what they've done to your forefathers. This is what the spirit of Islam was moving in during the 15th and 16th century. The book of Acts chapter 8 verse 29 reads this. I'll start at verse 27. And he arose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopia, an eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasure, and had come to Jerusalem for to worship. So there's no new thing under the sun. Castration has been a thing from the very beginning. And this man, unfortunately, he was a eunuch. Now, it doesn't go into great depth on how he was made a eunuch, but one can obviously make the assumption that his genitals was possibly removed, which is unfortunate, but that happened to our people. Yahushua said it because that was a thing back then, the same way it's a thing now, because there's nothing new under the sun. Now, the main point that I want Israel to highlight is the atrocity done into our young ones, which of course dives into the curses, or falls back into the curses. Deuteronomy 21 and Deuteronomy 28 and verse 41 reads this. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. And that very well happened, and pretty much all throughout the course of history, to be honest. The Egyptian captivity, of course, is written post-captivity, but it happened in the following captivity. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Medes, the Greeks, the Romans, America. And in verse 68 it reads this: "And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again," Egypt, of course, meaning slavery and or captivity, "with ships." So perhaps this may be your first time, hearing about the Israelites or finding out this page, but Egypt represents slavery and captivity. It's a house of bondage, pursuant to Micah the 6th chapter and the 2nd verse. So America is likened to the previous ancient Egypt, where the so-called blacks, the children of Israel, were living their time during slavery. And they're going to arrive to this new Egypt by ships. "By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again." We haven't seen the previous Egypt, because we're going to a brand new Egypt. "And there ye should be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." So you're going to be sold into your enemies, which of course would be none other than the so-called white man. However, we must include the Arabics and every other nation, because it wasn't just the so-called white man. You had the Ammonites, you had the Ishmaelites, you had the Hamites, you had the Assyrians, you had the Moabites. Now I could dive into all of that, but that'll require another video and a time in the season. But understand that we were sold into every nation. "And there you should be sold into your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, slave men and slave women, and no man shall buy you," which simply means redeem. No man will redeem you out of that captivity where you were sold. So it's very sad and unfortunate, but history matters. The truth matters. The Lord said, "The truth shall set you free." Let's bring that out. This is John chapter. This is what I really wanted. Let me see. 4:16. "Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" So this is truth that this happened towards us. And so if you want to desire to be a Muslim, you got to remember this is the history of the Muslims, them performing this. And you have to ask yourself, are you proud of this history, being a so-called Muslim? But the entire goal and point of this video is for Israel to be educated and understanding that the history of Islam has done nothing but harm our people. And this was done in the book of the Quran, in the name of the Quran. And so if you ever find yourself having itching ears, like I said before, remember this account. And ask yourself, where was Allah during this time? Why did he allow this to happen? Are there any answers within the Quran? Does Quran allow this? Does it explain why men would do this in the name of Islam? Mind you, while Islam was very fresh and new, seeing that it came around during the 7th century CE. So with that, Abaratazah Israel has been edified through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shemyaw Shai. You have a better understanding on the book, The Black Holocaust for Beginners by S.E. Anderson. Abaratazah, I'll be able to do more videos and lessons pertaining to the Arabic slave trade. With that, Shalom.